So welcome to the third installment of our study of White Sail. I'd like to thank you all for studying this, because this is a really important work, and it's not your average reading. It's not even your average Dharma reading. I was thinking White Sail reads more like a tantra. Even the sutras, they're a little bit more chatty and explicit. Of course, it depends which sutras, but White Sail is extremely profound, and I hope we'll be able to return to this. I was even thinking one should teach this once a year somehow, just have it. Anyway, the conditions for this present session is actually that someone asked that we teach it again, so that's where we are. Now, in this particular chapter, cleaning deviations, we're going to continue with ways that we can, you could say, get it wrong. This is important particularly because with what the Buddha taught, it was interestingly enough that he never gave the answer. The Buddha was not a philosopher. So what we have in the Buddhist teaching is a path of experience. And the theory shows us, to some extent, where to go. It gives some indications on, you could say, method and so forth, and it also gives a lot of advice on how not to go wrong, because our habitual patterns necessarily will take us into the patterns that have kept us in confusion forever. And so we've already in the first two chapters been equipped with a fair amount of language, if you like, that clarifies the idea and what really is the ground for this teaching, which was the request by Roger Wilde to transform ordinary nihilist phenomena into intangible wisdom phenomena, something like that. So the notion of nihilism, and particularly just the notion of being a little bit critical with regards to our habitual optics, is very much at the forefront in this discussion. And here we're going to use the understanding, the language, the tools that we have from the previous chapter in further discussion around the way we can go wrong in terms of nihilism, obviously, but also other ways such as eternalism, and also within some of the Buddhist traditions, how we as Buddhists can go wrong. So anyway, I don't think I've even put up the PowerPoint yet. Apologies. So this quote, it highlights how the Dharma works. We can see one quality is that despite that speech is subtle, inconceivable, it functions. And what's particular about the Buddha, with the Buddha's wisdom, is that this speech that is beyond substance, it manifests unceasingly within what we've been referring to here as dualistic substance. So our objective with the path is not a void, but the pure realm of enlightenment. We first need to recognize how the creator of all phenomena, mind, is ultimately insubstantial, yet compassionately manifests within both substance and substancelessness. With this recognition, we need to purify the substance habit through a substantial path. So the first refers to the overall objective and how it qualifies not as just nothingness. Indeed, yes, there is some illusions that need to be weeded out, but that doesn't stop, you could say, the manifestation of cognizance, and particularly once cognizance is no longer bogged down by confusion, cognizance unveils this realm of enlightenment. So you could say the Buddha and sentient beings, they share a ground nature, but the Buddha is someone who, in addition to possess this core of enlightenment, also has unveiled it, made it manifest, attained enlightenment. And in doing so, the Buddha has compassionately manifested within our world. You could say the nature of this ground that we speak about, mind, it's completely insubstantial. And yet, the Buddha manifests within our world as someone, you could say, that is perceived in terms of substance, yet pointing to that which is beyond substance. So with this recognition then of the nature of the path, we then need to purify our substance habit. Yes, obviously we are talking about our habitual outlook here when we use the term substance habit. But the skill of the Buddha is that the teaching that he gave is not just like you get with it and here, this is what enlightenment looks like, this is me. But rather than the Buddha compassionately addressed those to whom he was talking to according to their particular disposition, and him teaching through a path of substance using, you would say, tangible phenomena, then is the skill of the Buddha. With personal experience of the nature of this mind, we have a vision of what is our aim. Such sense of empowerment may be hampered by culturally induced misconceptions and attitudes. So once we determine, we resolve the key role of the mind, how this is then the source of what we experience in terms of substantial and insubstantial phenomena, we're empowered to work with our Buddha nature potential. There's a sense of understanding this through the Four Noble Truths. We understand we suffer due to confusion. How does this confusion come about? And in that this is a curable condition, we can actually do something about it. We have the insight and the appreciation that we could actually remove confusion, and that reflects our Buddha nature potential. So the teachings of Buddhism, they are empowering in that they encourage this proactive path of cultivating wisdom. But then again, often our own confusion, also culturally constructed discourse, reduces these teachings to fit within existing parameters of cultural perceptions. So many have opinions about Dharma without knowing what it is, and they judge it without having seen it. Like Rinpoche said, it's like shooting an arrow without having seen the mark. Their comments and their understanding and judgment is completely inappropriate. The Dharma, the teaching of the Buddha, is beyond the conceptual parameters of philosophy and religion. Wisdom cannot be known by narrow conceptual thought. The wisdom experience and qualities of meditators remains a secret to academics. So we're now looking at the various ways of missing the mark. There's these deviations then that we're addressing. So these come from popular beliefs about reality in general, about Dharma, about religion, and these are various ways of, you could say, institutionalized labeling of Buddhism. And so some will say, oh, Buddhism is a philosophy and not a religion. You know, this is actually very often said intended as a compliment, yeah? And then some will say, no, it's not a philosophy, it's a religion, so, etc. But the thing is, teaching of the Buddha falls into neither category. I always say the best way of understanding it is really like medicine. So there's nothing mysterious about it. There's nothing philosophical about it. It's just about doing it, but also understanding the illness and the way that the medicine interacts with the illness, of course. But that's possibly a useful metaphor. But when people, they do make these judgments, this comes from habitual modes then of understanding the reality that we live in, and it also then identifies something like Buddhism in terms of its material aspects, socio-economic aspects, behavior, practices, and all these phenomena that can be objectified, conceptualized, and as such, and this very often I have witnessed this. This very often is how Buddhism is studied within an academic context. And there's never ever any way that within such an approach to Buddhism, objectifying in such a way, that one could conceive then the intangible nature of wisdom. So studying to practice to attain intangible wisdom won't come about through pigeonholing as it's practiced through intellectuals and scholars. In this way we completely miss the mark and will never see this inconspicuous, intangible quality of wisdom as well as its manifestations. And particularly we won't be able to appreciate them in the subjectivity of practitioners. We need to break away from this substantialist habit. We need to increase pure wisdom phenomena through the path. The path needs to be based on the view beyond extremes. So obviously, for us to experience that which is beyond substance, we need to be willing to go beyond what can be only known through language and objectified in terms of just worldly philosophy, intellectual ideas. So we need to then increase pure wisdom phenomena, and that means to actually practice, actually follow the methods that enable something to recognize some qualities within ourselves. And discovering that also unveil other qualities that come naturally. We say if we unveil wisdom, then naturally also compassion follows. If we cultivate compassion, then also wisdom follows. But this is all phenomena that is experienced through the path. Now this path ultimately needs to be based on a view that is not dogmatic. It's beyond extremes, and we'll be particularly addressing then the extremes of nihilism and eternalism here. This is not dogma, it's something that is beyond the narrow parameters of language. So the scope of Dharma is beyond nihilism. So now we are attending to what we could call the nihilist deviation. Now, Dharma can accommodate nihilism, yet it sees a greater picture. So, of course, we're familiar with how Buddhism is very popular because it doesn't necessarily have a God, or it operates with a certain rationality. But that rationality is not limited to just the rationality that we normally operate within. It sees far beyond that. Thinley Norbu says, the pith of nihilism is disbelief in anything beyond the appearance of perceptible material phenomena, because there is no awareness or recognition of the phenomena that are beyond the reality and perception of ordinary obscured senses. And nihilism means becoming caught within each temporary circumstance of relative truth and believing in its reality. So the perception of substance seems real. So the only difference in the materialist nihilism that we come across over the ages, we're not just talking about necessarily the scientific or materialistic scientism that we have nowadays. But it's something that's normal. If you study Madhyamika, there's the old Indian tradition of the Charvakas. They also are nihilists and didn't believe anything beyond just what they would perceive with their ordinary obscured senses. So the only difference is that the circumstances throughout the ages, and this nihilist view is then, you would say, a reductionist, materialist view. We only believe in the value of what we can observe with our gross senses, and we then completely are caught within the circumstances of what we then call relative truth, that we think our perception is true and we fail to see the bigger picture. And that is what constitutes samsara, this clinging to substance. It is when we are oblivious to our natural condition, the subtlety of the mind, and just caught up with the experience of ourself and our objects. We have this duality. And this creates this solidification with regards to the object. So we say duality creates the substance or the object. And once we are caught with such duality, then we're veiled, then we have this cognitive obscuration. We say substance veils Buddha nature, creating karmic patterns and destructive emotions. It's actually a little bit the other way around. Once we have this basic delusion, then based on this sense of me and the other, then we augment this, you could say, afflicted state where there's me, am I getting what I want, am I not getting what I want, likes and dislikes, and then we have the destructive emotions, the kleshas. And it's then on the basis of the kleshas, of the destructive emotions, that we then begin to act out. And that becomes then patterning, that creates karmic patterning. This basic duality, this basic perception of substance is created by ignorance. Awakening from ignorance, substance is then seen as wisdom-light appearances. Such awakening unfolds as compassion. Wisdom dwells neither in samsara or nirvana. So, this is where you could say the book, like White Sail, it requires that we just take it easy and just think about it. And I also would like to once again say, if ever there are questions, you're welcome to send me a mail. No guarantee I can answer it, but I'll share with you whatever I have heard. Now, when we say substance is created by ignorance, this means essentially that we're giving primacy to consciousness, and it also means that what we perceive as solid is a delusional assumption. And if we look at phenomena, as we can do within Western or modern physics, then we see that actually the perception of objects is very problematic. There seems to be some physical reality, but as soon as we go into the quantum dimension of phenomena, the problem is we can't really find anything, and whatever we find there is very much tied up with the subject. The idea of a solid exterior is very true in terms of our conventional experience, but when we analyze, then we can see there's not anything that we objectify. So we have this paradox that there seemingly is something there, and yet if we look, there's not. We say that it's our ignorance that initially conceives of a self. Cognizance is diminished into just thinking self, and then the perception of the self, the display, is then solidified as substance. Now, when we're practicing the path, then we're beginning to let go of ignorance. We're beginning to let go of these narratives and assumptions, the belief in this solidified objective reality. And this we do through both analysis, like Madhyamika, and also through meditation. And this is gradually going to undermine the ignorance. And gradually we begin to have some more immediate, more awake experience of our reality. And this is where the perceptions no longer are seen as solid, but rather transformed into what we then, or Rinpoche calls, wisdom light appearances. And this is the vision that we bring with us in the Vajrayana visualization practice and so on. And this nature that we are unveiling, the experience then of the so-called objective world and so forth, the moment that we are aligned with some quality of wisdom, then we also have perceptions of phenomena as a display of compassion. And here there's not the idea of objective phenomena as much as just the manifestation of wisdom externally. So this capacity that is innate to reality, you could say, with awakening, then it manifests as compassion. The ground nature is that the wisdom or it's not something that lends itself to neither samsara nirvana. It's not something that is, we could say it's wisdom that cuts through the delusion of samsara. But wisdom in itself is neither defined in terms of samsara or nirvana. Wisdom does not dwell as something that can be objectified. So also in nirvana, it's not something that we just stay in, the way we just dwell in nirvana as a condition or absolute state. So hence we would say the sage possessing wisdom neither dwells in the confusion of samsara, nor is partial or hangs out in the peace of nirvana. So the thing is, when Thinley Norbu he teaches and he wants to make a point, as he does right now about nihilism and substance, he also throws in some other points that are essential actually. And even though they might, you could say, trip us up a little bit as we're reading this is really essential for us because this will be valid later on to have that perspective. Now, when we say lack of substance, that which we see through the path, it's understood differently within the gradual path. What we call the Hinayana achieves detachment from phenomena through selflessness. The Mahayana purifies this substance habit through realizing the twofold selflessness, the selflessness of person and the selflessness of object. And Vajrayana sees phenomena with the prior understanding of the Mahayana, but also then seeing the naturally pure, seeing phenomena as naturally pure wisdom deity. It carries the manifestation as of perceptions as what we call wisdom deity. This is a term we'll be discussing. So all these angles signify the view, which first needs to be understood. So whether we are practitioners according to the Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana systems, we first need to have a view, and then we need to experientially first understand it, digest it, and then realize it through the path of meditation and also the further practice of integration through post-meditation practice in everyday life. Now, Buddhism cannot be narrowed down to fit a nihilist agenda. By the way, I'd like you to draw your attention to the section in the Dropbox that's called Reading, and I put in an article which was conducted by Helen Torkoff for Tricycle in 1995, and it's a really interesting interview with Rinpoche, and this is actually, he says at one point, most Buddhist teachers nowadays, they're actually nihilist. And we very often, with the sort of glee with which people embrace Buddhist rationality and Buddhism non-theism and so forth, there's this tendency to veer towards the materialist view, like, we agree with everybody. This Buddhism business is very benign and it fits into everybody's, wiser self and so on. It's not exactly the case. Anyway, I would warmly recommend reading this narrative with Rinpoche. It's as with anything with him, it's quite provocative. Also, just before I touched on the origins of substance perception, solidification, and so on, I think I put something up there which is called the Prayer of Samantabhadra. I'll have a look, which actually explains this quite nicely. Anyway, yeah. So, back to the text here. So, Buddhism cannot be narrowed down to fit a nihilist agenda. Nihilists, there he referred to, nihilist scopes and objectives are vastly different. Nihilism is concerned with momentary substance, you could say materialist reality. Dharma is concerned with substanceless enlightenment, the intangible. And also, I'll just read something about the book where the Rinpoche says the Buddhist aim is to increase substanceless wisdom qualities which are the unchangeable ecstasy of peace. In Buddhism, the basis of the point of view, the path of practice, and the result of the activity always connect to inconceivable enlightenment. So Buddhism is not easy to understand because it's not the scope of our ordinary, you'd say, cultural discourse, and we are, with everything that we come across in Buddhism, we are connecting them to the inconceivable enlightenment. This is also why there are practices in various practices of Buddhism in various cultures, because persons of different cultures and disposition, they would be able to connect to enlightenment through the skillful application and integration of their particular phenomena. So basically, this is about the attempt to sanitize and narrow down the Buddhist view to fit familiar views that we might find in philosophy, in epistemology, ecology, and so forth. And when we do that, we miss the point again. The nihilist view is that phenomena truly exist in a material sense. That's all really that the general materialist science would identify as being real, true, that which can be empirically observed. The Buddhist view is that phenomena only exists relatively and fleetingly. The Buddhist view is that we are deceived in regards to both subjective and objective phenomena. So the Buddhist view is really has to do with the subject, and you could say this thing of epistemic capacity, that what needs to be done has to do with the observer. It's the observer that gets it wrong. There's actually a place where Rousseau, he says, nature never deceives us. It is we who deceive ourselves. So the Buddhist view is that we're deceived in regards to both subjective and objective phenomena. And in fact, if we look, and this also we would sort of come across in science, in physics, in fact, phenomena are without substance or self. Then again, drawing in physics or science is tricky because the language and the assumptions that they would draw from the fact of not finding anything are very different from the assumptions that we find in Buddhism. But we're still not just talking about the void that's left when we don't find anything, but we're very interested in how did we get it wrong in the first place, and how can we address this confusion that projects and solidifies, and freeing ourselves from that. There's a quality of wisdom within the subject that is unveiled. So that's a huge difference. Nihilists assert that consciousness arises from material circumstances, and that when these circumstances cease, so does consciousness. Buddhists assert that phenomena arise from basic bewilderment of alaya. So this is also a biggie. I actually also put up a thing which I wrote, which is called, I think I called it Perspectives on Consciousness in Relation to Death. And it sort of just draws up where we stand in terms of East and West and so forth, modern science and Buddhist science. And it's just a page, so it's easily read. Anyway, The nihilist position is ignorant about the basic ground of consciousness, the basic ground of consciousness in its bewilderment. And we understand consciousness here as this continuity that we talked about before, which veils the Dharmakaya, enlightenment itself. But as long as we have this substance habit, if you like, and this bewilderment, then this is where our initial dualistic confusion and fixation takes place. Now, nihilists would generally believe that consciousness comes from substance. We would say it's an epiphenomenon of neurobiological systems or something like that, that it arises out of that. The problem here is it's difficult to detect actually a relationship between the cause and the result, one being inanimate, the other being animate. But believing that, then they would also hold that when the material circumstances that produce consciousness dissolves at death, that is the end of consciousness also. So this view does not recognize how mind causes substantial phenomena as we do in Buddhism in general, as per the 12 links that starts off with ignorance and then the projecting of self, and from that then the various labels, consciousnesses, the samskaras, and so forth. So that's the nihilists, which then needs to be talked about, right? I think anybody who's not completely compartmentalized their practice of Dharma is aware of the, you could say, discrepancy in the tensions between these two perspectives that we have, particularly in our modern culture. The other is eternalism, the eternalist deviation. And before I go any further, I'll just check if there doesn't seem to be any questions. Is that a good thing? Or I hope maybe it's clear. I hope it means everything is just crystal clear. Okay. All right. Good. Very good. Very clear. A bit mind-blowing. Okay. Okay. Good. Anyway, please just write questions if you have them, and we'll have a look at that later on at the end. So when we say eternalists, we generally talk about the religious perspective, and we say that eternalists are the ones that claim some external creator God. The thing is, there's a paradox here, because eternalists very often subscribe to nihilist views, materialism, and these eternalists then they object generally to Buddhism's lack of a creator God. Thinley Norbu Rinpoche, he says, let me just actually, just to go back here a bit. So the thing about the eternalists, yes, they hold that there's a God, but the thing is, very often belief in a God, as we have it in our culture, is part of a culture. And even though people say I'm whatever, Christian, Muslim, Jew, and so forth, Hindu, but particularly actually with the Abrahamic religions, then there is this sense that it's part of a culture, and people predominantly are nihilist in their views. They generally subscribe to a materialist perception. So either way, then eternalists, they very often would also find Buddhism very odd, since it doesn't speak about God, and they would get very confused with the Buddhist view and its, you could say, ontological, its view on reality, and also its moral premises, which are generally not founded as or established as some absolute right and wrong, but very often is skillful dealing with relative truth. But there's a lot of discussion of that, and actually John Paul II, he wrote a book in which he says Buddhism is in large measure an atheistic system, and he called this book mind you, it's not only about Buddhism, it's about different other things, but he called the book Crossing the Threshold of Hope. And Trinley Norbu Rinpoche, he actually, he was a bit sort of, and what happened also was that this is when the Pope was traveling to Sri Lanka, not the present Pope, but the previous one, and people in Sri Lanka weren't pleased. Anyway, Trinley Norbu Rinpoche, he wrote a response to that book, and he called it Welcoming Flowers from Across the Cleansed Threshold of Hope. And I actually put these up in the reading. Thing is, this happened in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka has an interesting history of actually debating and actually defeating Christians in debate. It's interesting, all of this, and I also put up in the Dropbox a book written by a journalist and this took place in the 19th century, these Christian Buddhist debates. So if any of you are interested in this, I put up a little PDF that's called The Great Debate, Buddhism and Christianity Face to Face. Anyway, Rinpoche says, although spiritual appearances can occur both within form and formlessly, spiritual qualities cannot be recognized by only accepting the forms of eternalist traditions, gods, and beliefs with a material point of view. So Rinpoche here has pointed out that while wisdom is something that pervades both material and immaterial, it is not something, wisdom will never take root in us as long as we are still caught up in this duality of ourselves and others, and we posit some objective Godhead that's outside. Of course, within Vedanta, it's a lot more subtle, and there we talk about consciousness as God and so forth. But there is this notion that God is not something that can be grasped. So if we come across the middle way, which you could say is the relinquishing of any dogmatic or extreme position, some eternalists, they might perceive then the middle way as nihilism. The Mahayana view is freedom from conceptual constructs altogether, and that's the view. Its path is the accumulation of wisdom and merit, and that's both applying tangible and intangible phenomena. Its fruition is the space of reality, the Dhamma Dhatu, endowed with the qualities of enlightenment. So this is the awakening to reality that, although not tangible, it's something that pervades both material and immaterial and possesses countless qualities of enlightenment. So this nature then we refer to as Dharmakaya, awake wisdom, and the Dharmakaya compassionately displays as two Rupakayas, meaning two form bodies, and these are then respectively Sambhogakaya, which are the intangible qualities of enlightenment's compassion, and Nirmanakaya, tangibly manifesting in the perception of sentient beings. So when we talk about the reality of enlightenment, non-confusion, non-delusion, it's not just a blank, but it's something that manifests. It's when, you could say, the capacity or the potential, the qualities that are innate, they then blossom. One thing is that there's the dimension of Sambhogakaya, which are all these intangible qualities that are innate. These are qualities that we all recognize. So there's qualities like strength, like compassion, like wisdom. And from these three, wisdom, compassion, and strength, manifest countless qualities. And this is particularly reflected then in the Vajrayana culture around all the different mandalas and all the countless deities that are Sambhogakaya, that are the embodiments of these enlightened qualities. And then we have Nirmanakaya, the manifesting in the perception of sentient beings. So for those who are very subtle or very spiritually advanced, they would even perceive Sambhogakaya manifestations. But in general, we would refer to Nirmanakaya as those teachers that manifest in this world, such as the Buddha, such as our teachers and so forth. These are regarded as Nyamanakayas, or in Tibetan Tulku. And this is enlightenment that tangibly manifests according to the abilities, the merit, and the perceptions then of sentient beings. Now, enlightenment as such manifests as unceasing display of compassion. And this is really just to refute the idea then that some might have that Buddhism is just nihilism, that the idea of and Dharmakaya is intangible, or the middle way refutation of anything that can be objectified, that implies that there's nothing. This is not the case. It's rather the contrary. Thinley Norbu just says, the pith of the general eternalist point of view is that gods and heavens have a permanent existence, which is distinct from personal phenomena. So there, the idea is also very much that that there is some objective, substantially existing God or heaven. So, but anyway, this is really regardless of whether there's belief in form or formless gods, one or multiple gods. Doesn't really matter. But the thing is that whatever this God is viewed as is not regarded as a reflection of the mind and its wisdom. So these Godhead or gods are seen as being something that exists outside. Now, the objective of enlightenment, and through the reasoning and the meditation of the Madhyamaka view, is to break down these narrow assumptions that are founded on both innate and doctrinal confusion. And I should also say here that very often when we describe the world, particularly then in a Buddhist cosmology or Asian cosmology, we talk about gods, but that's just like we talk about gods in the Greek context. You know, you have gods that live at Mount Olympus, and they have their, their life and events and so forth. And similarly also, we have discussion of gods just as a realm of samsara, a realm of existence. And it's just a more subtle, more blissful experience. But these are just beings in samsara. But of course, in the eternalist view, then there is the idea of God as being something that is more than just caught in just another being. But the problem with that is then, as is being discussed here, is that it's still that such a God, such a creator God, is essentially seen as unrelated or external to us, and that perception of God as a creator is then problematic. So that's the crux then of the eternalist view. Then we have a deviation that happens in some Buddhist tradition, and there they would say that Sambhogakaya manifests as a great rather they would say it can't be Buddhism because they talk about these gods, and you even hear some teachers for some traditions and say, oh, this mantra, it's just nonsense, you might as well be repeating Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola. Or they say that, oh, the Mahayana Buddhists or the Vajrayana Buddhists, they've imported sort of things from, Kashmiri Shaivite traditions or whatever. So there's not really an understanding of what the Sambhogakaya is understood actually within Buddhism. And there the Sambhogakaya, as we mentioned before, is something that manifests out of emptiness. It manifests out of the intangible reality, but is endowed with the qualities of enlightenment. So it's not some objectively existing permanent God. So these manifest within great emptiness, and yet these qualities are beyond any conceptual position as of permanence. So this is where we could say we have this discussion in the Uttara Tantra, the qualities of enlightenment. So we practice. Why? Because we have Buddha nature. We appreciate peace, we appreciate wisdom, we appreciate compassion. And through the path we unveil these qualities. Now, that's the general path. It's gradual. We gradually unveil these qualities. But the Vajrayanas, they view these qualities, the result, as already present within us, as the dimension of our mind, which is unconfused wisdom. And this we then refer to as deity, wisdom deity. Doing so, such practitioners transform substance habit into non-dual, pure phenomena. So there's a very different way of relating to phenomena, no longer seen as just solid, inanimate, external phenomena, but are seen as pure display. So we do speak about pura, and again, this is where Rinpoche is just incomparable in his language, and then discussing the oh, let me just see if I can find it here. Yeah. So according to relative truth, right, then we hear about Pure Lands. And it's very often, particularly in like Chinese Buddhism, where there's chanting Amitabha, and also Tibetans also chanting to be reborn in Amitabha, Sukhavati, and so forth. Yet this is according to relative truth. We don't necessarily go there with karmic bodies. We might describe these pure realms as external, and we have to. And as long as we have dualistic mind, we cannot discard this dualistic language. Rinpoche says, when we are inseparable from Pure Land and the Pure Land's deity, there is no discrimination between whether the deity and Pure Land has come to us or we have gone to them. No distinction is made between external and internal existence because dualistic habit has vanished into indestructible oneness and everything is inseparable. This is on the middle of page 39. Anyway, the thing is, in conventional perception, it might seem that pure phenomena are apart from us. So we think of Sukhavati and we have tangas of them and so forth, but we actually, in Poma practice and so forth, and prayers to be reborn, we're not relying on dualistic mind to journey to such a place. We might use dualistic concept and language, but ultimately the destination and the one traveling is beyond this duality. So of course, some, what Rinpoche calls dualistic Buddhists, they might not understand this, and they obviously then would lack the faith in the value of such a path of pure perception. But the thing is, we need a path that utilizes skillfully this subject and object until we ourselves are beyond duality. So as long as we have dualistic mind, we cannot regard this language. So worship of wisdom deity purifies ego habit and connects with pure enlightenment phenomena. With purification, offerings, I think it's supposed to say, offering becomes free from the threefold concept of subject, object, and action. And now, for the above reasons then, taking duality on the path, then Buddhists accumulate merit through visualizing, worshipping deities, and so forth. And this we see in places like India, Tibet, Thailand, Nepal, Bhutan, and anywhere in the world where there's Buddhist culture. The intention is to purify samsaric perceptions, breaking the narrowness of ego's habit and the suffering that it brings. And ultimately, yes, the nature of wisdom is beyond this duality, and the offering ultimately also should go beyond the fixation on subject, object, and the act of offering itself. But for the time being, we need faith in outer Buddhas. We might actually not subscribe to the idea of faith in outer Buddhas, but we actually are very often we're awed by, you could say, outer Nirmanakaya Buddhas, sages, and so forth. And what actually enables us to appreciate their qualities is that we have Buddha nature. And so when it says here we need the faith in outer Buddha which reflect our Buddha nature, it's not just that it's something that we need to cultivate out of nowhere. It's something that we naturally have, but we need to nurture it. As long as we don't have faith in Buddha nature, then gods and demons appear externally. The core of this is actually nihilist habit of wanting substantial rewards. This is something that is quite pervasive in many cultures, and that is the idea of gods and demons. And this, over many lifetimes, we have been born into cultures like that. We then have these projection of demons. We rely on exorcism. We don't realize that these are, again, creations of the mind. So the result is sometimes that when the negative circumstance is happening, then there's bitterness against the gods that have been worshipped, and this again comes from ignorance, lacking belief in innate or confidence in Buddha nature. So then that leads to blaming the gods, and the thing is also, if we look at the whole principle of worshipping gods externally, even though it's an eternalist project, attributing them some eternal absolute role, the desires are entirely materialist, and so they are actually nihilist, and the result is self-destruction. We end up losing out. We miss, you could say, the nature of reality. So until we abandon dualistic mind, there is the experience of benefit and harm from the outside. That's universal, whether we believe in gods and demons or just our comforts and all that. As long as there's dualistic mind, we will suffer and experience benefit and harm depending on whether we're getting what we want or not. We're dependent on the externals. With dualism, we go back and forth between eternalism and nihilism. So we can see that, in fact, the way that we are seeing reality is that sometimes we attribute some, they're essentially figments of thoughts. So yet not recognizing Buddha nature within, then some will say, oh, there must be somebody who created this. And so then there's the eternalistic view. Or I don't believe in anything whatsoever. And that's the nihilist view. I'm just believing in what's perceived. Nevertheless, there's not the idea that nihilists and eternalists, they're blocked or can't attain enlightenment, or they're bad people. This is just manifestations of ignorance. So there's the notion that the Buddha, the Buddhist teaching, could be applied by anyone, including nihilists and eternalists. Then we have what we could call academic deviation. And this is, again, where we look at what's happening in the modern world when Buddhism becomes an object of academic inquiry and academic knowledge. And it's also interesting that Buddhism is never really drawn into, you could say, the debates within science or even the philosophy or in the humanities. It's very often relegated to departments like Asian studies and so forth. So Rinpoche says, Buddhism cannot be defined or understood by mere bookish verbiage. it is necessary to establish a profound point of view with faith, blessings, wisdom teachings, and the practice of samadhi in order to be able to fathom the vast meaning of Buddhism. So simply by its very nature, Buddhism cannot be understood as an academic subject. And the path is based on an appreciation for what cannot be quantified or objectified. You cannot know Buddhism through mere information or data any more than you can understand love or any kind of emotion or affective experience through data or just, you could say, language. So that was the academic deviation. Now there's the sectarian deviation. These are, by the way, labels that I'm just putting on here to get a grip on sort of the divisions here. And this is where very often there's the assumption that only Indian Buddhism is authentic. And we actually have that. To some extent, what we call the Theravadan tradition has, since its very origins, which was several hundred years after the Buddha, has insisted that there is a closed canon and nothing beyond that. So it's only that they accept that is the Buddha. And that contradicts the limitless nature of enlightenment. Of course, because it's not limited to language, then the nature of enlightenment is something that is can be experienced differently. Rather, it's the universal, but it could be pointed to in different ways depending on who is the audience. And in fact, we find in the sutras, the Buddha himself says, I will teach with the sounds of gods, with the sounds of nagas, with the sounds of yakshas, with the sounds of gandharvas, and with the sounds of human beings. However many sounds of human beings exist, with that many sounds I will teach. So if we were to hold that only teachings that come from the Sanskrit or the Pali, that's Buddhism, Rinpoche says it's contradictory even from its own perspective and is an indication of not believing in the omniscience of the Buddha who can reveal limitless teaching as by the quote here. And we then have traditions that object to Mahayana Vajrayana teachings, claiming they are not the Buddha's teaching because they did not originate in Sanskrit or Pali. Yet Dharma translated into Tibetan or written by sublime beings in Tibetan, they are equally capable of conveying enlightenment. So we will continually see Dharma unfolding across various borders and languages. But the thing is, some might use the Dharma so it becomes a vehicle of narrow sectarianism, which comes from lack of wisdom. It contradicts devotion to one's own spiritual lineage. So there are those who think that there's only one Buddhist tradition which is authentic, and they then would criticize other traditions. And this kind of sectarianism reflects obviously lack of wisdom and following habitual polemical habitual patterns. It's good to have faith in one's own lineage, like one's Dharma lineage, but it shouldn't result in narrow sectarianism. Sectarianism comes with all the usual delusions and arrogance and condescension, and it can be passed on for generations. It creates negative energy, and it has this circular logic for justification resulting in self-righteous ego. So spirituality ends up becoming a vehicle for sectarianism. The thing is, if one trains and if one studies and trains in the path of Dharma, then it's about relinquishing ego, it's about relinquishing narrowness and opening up wisdom mind. And with wisdom, ordinary narrow pursuits, and especially the bitter obsessions like sectarianism, falls away naturally. So we do have the superficial forms of syncretism, And these actually become very confused. Someone might look sectarian, but they are in fact practicing with an open mind. Some might look open, but their minds are tightly closed, as Rinpoche says, with their rusty iron ego's latch. So these are different ways that one could address the different traditions. So there is the idea of spiritual window shopping, which tends to be rather superficial, and it has this flip side of mixing up ideas according to one's own inspiration. What Rinpoche refers to ends up as a filthy cesspool of confusion. And the thing is, one could well just use a whole life of making up one's own sort of mishmash and think that is non-sectarianism. Then some might look very sectarian because they're not concerned with this politically correct non-sectarian facade. They might just simply practice genuinely according to their teacher's instruction, and they might achieve wisdom, which by nature is non-sectarian. And then you have confusion where people, they are open, they think they're open, but actually their minds are very closed. So they might pretend it's non-sectarianism, but they reduce Dharma to an ordinary object of commerce. So Rinpoche, he sort of operates with, or puts this in with three categories then. These three then are the political, I think it should probably, political non-sectarianism, which is sectarianism, which is like a coalition. Then you have non-sectarian spiritual materialism, which is more like a business. And then you have those that are open to all but benefiting from none. So there's like a child trying to catch the stars. So the first then is this kind of, it's like having a pretense that there's some sort of unity in all paths. And this might just be wishing that this is something, and there's a political but also a personal agenda that results in this wanting to fuse everything. And it's more just like the kind of unity that you'd find in political parties getting together, each for their own benefit, this kind of coalition. Then there's the non-sectarian, where again it's just one's own, whatever is working for one makes one feel better, and that's kind of just like running a business. There's not really any unveiling of wisdom. And the last one is just using anything, which Rinpoche compares to like a child lying there in its crib, reaching up to the skies, wanting to catch the stars. So true non-sectarianism can come from following and perfecting the stages of the causal path, achieving wisdom through extraordinary merit and faith. So we could have true non-sectarianism that comes from studying with wise teachers. And there we critically reflect, and we eventually identify with and comprehend, absorb these teachings, subdues one's destructive patterns, increases impartiality, and then the openness and insight of compassion happens through practice, and this brings about wisdom that sees the lack of contradiction in all these various relative views. As we saw earlier in chapter 2, I think, where the Buddha was quoted having said, "Worldly beings argue with me, but I am not going to argue with them." So we can also achieve such non-sectarianism without much study. One might have merit from previous lives. One might be gifted with intelligence, devotion to a wisdom teacher, recognizing and realizing wisdom just through a few words of pith instructions, upadesha from the teacher, and achieving the non-dual wisdom free from any conceptual construct. One may become truly non-sectarian. As reality is beyond conceptual labels and opinion, ultimately there is no basis for sectarianism. Such wisdom is realized through the blessing of a wisdom teacher. Such teachers see wisdom everywhere, and hence they inspire others to be non-sectarian. So ultimately, non-sectarianism is possible because wisdom is free from dogma, from point of view. So the real non-sectarianism is this equanimity of abiding in non-dual wisdom, and this quality arises from the blessing of a wisdom teacher. The wisdom teacher is our example as someone not bound by discrimination and seeing all phenomena as equally true and pure, and seeing all the seeing all the qualities of wisdom. So such an individual would never have the desire to disturb their own mind with sectarianism. And with no stain of sectarianism, they also inspire others to be free from such non-virtue. So finally here Rinpoche says, non-sectarian wisdom teachers always see purity since their minds are unstained by the contradictions of intellectual selection. Through the openness of wisdom, they see countless aspects of knowledge as expressions of one essence. Therefore, they can guide other beings according to their wishes and capacities through different traditions toward the ultimate goal of enlightenment, just as hundreds of rivers and streams flow into the same vast ocean. I wish we had a sound recording of Rinpoche speaking. I have some recordings, but they're in Tibetan. But Rinpoche's diction and way of speaking was very clear, very intense, very emphatic, and exquisitely eloquent and elegant. Anyway, so once again, I apologize for going a little bit over time. For the next time, please read the rest of the chapter. So just checking if there's any questions here. So, if someone is enlightened, have they stepped above the concept of God or labeling God? What I have found in some people who have been able to, what I have found is even that some, like Muslims, who are able to step above that. And if that is true, do you think that these paths can also lead to the path of enlightenment? Yes, indeed. I mean, you have wisdom traditions everywhere. Certainly in the Abrahamic traditions, in the Christians, the Muslims, the Jewish traditions, and you have it. You can say everywhere. So I would say there's always persons with extraordinary faculties that see wisdom as the inconspicuous quality that abides within. And so at that point, whether we call it God or not is secondary. And it's hard to say which paths lead to enlightenment as long as there's you could say the freedom from any objectifications and any reference point, the complete unveiling of innate Buddha nature, completely without any obscurations left, then that would necessarily be enlightenment, yes. So similarly, also many of the traditions that we have in other the phenomena of other religions also, they are very often seen in terms of according to the individual perceptions. For example, angels. We could have angels in different, like for example in Christianity, and it depends really if we're talking about individuals or if we're talking about like wisdom manifestation. So that differs. So I guess we'll conclude here. Bye-bye. We'll just do dedication. Okay. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish, ever more and more.